There's going to be a phase in which people who thought that they were safe or that this wasn't a big deal are suddenly going to recognize that they have no mechanism whatsoever to protect themselves from the movement, that the quality of the arguments the movement is making are not high, but the quality of the strategy it's spectacular. And
Yeah, no,
so
it's got this viral power to it. Um, and one of the only reasons that I feel like I was a little bit more wise to it maybe than some of the other people in the business is because I spent 10 years of my life in Russia. I went to school in the Soviet Union. I remember a lot of these thought patterns. I don't have a terribly distinguished academic career, but one of the few things I do know about is Russian history. And, the ideas can be dangerous. They can be more dangerous than really anything. And I think there's an imperative that we have in reporting, and it's very reinforced by Twitter, which is when you veer off into a topic that the majority of your colleagues decide is not important or not as important as something else. In the Trump era, this comes up a lot. Like, why are you looking at this when we have to deal with Trump? There's so many more. There's kids in cages. You shouldn't be paying attention to X, Y, and Z. And as a result, things that actually are really important often get short shrift. And I think you're right. This whole thing is really about it's about intellectual freedom. It's about the values of the Enlightenment. It's sort of about the sort of core ideas of the American experiment are now under fire. And there's a lack of a willingness to look at what that means or what that might mean going forward. I think because people just don't recognize how serious it is, and it's again, it's similar to what happened in Russian history. People thought that this little clan of super motivated Bolsheviks were never going to go anywhere, because even within the relatively small minority of socialists who were very active, they were considered nuts. But they had a way of thinking that was very difficult to counter in an institutional setting. And this is kind of a similar thing, I think. And people are seeing this, that once it gets into an institution, it's just really difficult to oppose. Like, people don't want to be the person to stand up and say, I'm against anti-racism measures, or I'm against the expansion of the diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, because it just sounds bad, and they don't want to risk the possibility of public canceling as well.
well, a couple things. One, I heard a little bit of hope bubble up there for you. You said it's very difficult to counter. I think if there's one thing we know, it's that it's impossible to counter. And the way we know that is that no institution resists. The
Right.
best examples in terms of, let's say, a college that resists is the University of Chicago, and it's not a shining example. It's barely ahead of its competitors. So when you have something that washes over every institution, you know that there isn't at that level a solution. And I'm not arguing there's no solution possible. In fact, I want to talk to you about a possible solution later on in the podcast. But
Obviously.
but there's a clear pattern here. You don't think that this is serious until it comes for you, at which point it's too late.
Right.
It's like that formulation. And you said a bunch of things I want to bring into the mix here. One is, you say you're familiar with some of this from Russian history. In part, the parallel to Russian history is a little misleading because it's really Chinese history that is the relevant example. The mechanism,
Right.
the social mechanism of action is much closer to the Chinese version of this. And, a lot of the parallels are just incredibly close. And then there's obviously parallels to the French Revolution as well, the Reign of Terror. But it's not going to be any of these things exactly. It's
Right.
going to be a new version. The real question for people like you and me, I think, is, does this process that we are watching unfold in 2020 land on that list of remarkable tragedies brought on by movements? Does this land on the list with the Bolshevik Revolution, with the Nazis, with the Cambodian Revolution, with the Rwandan genocide? Do we end up in one of those, or is there some conceivable way out of this?
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, it, obviously those movements were more violent to begin with. They were taking place in um, more more openly uh, um, destabilized political environments. Although this one's pretty bad as well. Uh, but so far, the penetration of this has almost entirely been intellectual, right, and bureaucratic. Um, and when we talk about cancel culture, what we're usually talking about is people losing their jobs, and then the accompanying problem of people being afraid to speak out. It's not yet at the level of people going, being dragged off to basements and put up against the wall as they did, in the early days of the Soviet Union, or thrown into ditches or whatever it is. So it's not that yet, but just in the last month, we've seen so many headlines suggesting that institutional America is already almost completely consumed by these ideas. And we saw yesterday, I saw you tweeting about this, with the federal government, is adopting ideas that are, frankly crazy, right? And it's very troubling. The July 4th open letter in Princeton, which something I'm looking into now. Like, if that could happen at Princeton,
Mm.
uh, and it hasn't happened yet, right? Like the things that they're asking for in that letter have not yet been approved. But if the person who is speaking out against that can be denounced by the president in a place like Princeton, which actually was one of the few universities to adopt the University of Chicago principles that you talked about, then that's a significant blow, right? I mean, it speaks a lot to the problem that's going on across the country. And as a reporter, I'm finding out all kinds of stuff that I never knew. Like, if you're an academic now and you're applying for a job, in probably half the cases, you have to submit a statement to HR with your sort of diversity ideas. And that's a prerequisite before your application even gets to the department that might even be interested in you for whatever the subject matter is. So this idea of having like these political commissars in the middle of sort of every level of intellectual work in this country, I think it's just people don't recognize the extent to which it's already happened. And from the journalistic perspective, we have a long way to go to get people to understand that.
Yeah. One thing I want to just adjust about what I heard you say earlier. You said that it was about free expression and enlightenment ideas. And in one way, I think it is about that from the perspective of those of us defending those things, because we know
Right.
how important they are. From the
Right.
point of view of the movement, I don't think it's about those things. It's almost purely about power over material things and the ability to speak openly about what's wrong with this plan, the ability to invoke something like science in order to demonstrate that a claim might be false, the ability to appeal to normal rules of due process in order to establish a claim. All of these things have to be disrupted in order for a movement based on fictions in order for it to take over. So I think the I believe he was an ex NSA officer, William Binney, described
Yeah.
many of the structures that were put in place after 9/11 as a turnkey totalitarian state. The idea being that the structures were in place, but the key hadn't been turned, so it didn't feel totalitarian, but it could at any moment. And this movement actually has that element to it, where it is disrupting the things that would allow you to get in the way of its power grab, but the key hasn't been fully turned yet. It's, why do you want to get rid of the police? Right?
Right.
well, there's an excuse for why you want to get rid of the police, but then there's also what you're going to do after the police are gone, because the police are really the mechanism through which all of the other mechanisms keep people from just taking what they can.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess as bad as things are for the things that are very important, I think eliminating those things is a means to an end, and I worry about not only the disruption of the essential foundational stuff, but the end that is ultimately being pursued, which I don't think most of the people participating even know about.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. A lot of people who are marching, who are protesting, and think they're talking about one thing, and maybe there's a minority of people who actually know what it's about. But the important thing is what's going on institutionally, and both in terms of the sort of explosion of new administrative staff that has taken place on campuses, but increasingly also is taking place in companies like media companies. This sort of new decision makers who are inserting their imperatives into the work, right? So even in media, we're having situations where, like, the Intercept, right, which is one of the most liberal media companies there is. There was a strong push to put in the charter of the organization that its journalistic mission was to advance anti-racist causes. Now, they haven't quite gone there yet. They sort of took a little bit of a left turn before they went all the way there. But that's something that's being pressed in a lot of media companies right now, is this idea of writing it into the mission. And that's more important, I think, than how many people are on the streets. It's like, is the institution now fully captured? Is it already demonstrated that the leaders of these institutions will respond to letters and calls for firings by indulging them, right? And I think, as you pointed out, in pretty much every case, that's already been proven to be true, right? So until somebody starts standing up and resisting some of these things, and showing a way to do it, it's just going to spread to everything. The big tech corporations, big media companies, academia already. So yeah, it's hard to know what to do.
Yeah.